Hello, everyone. Welcome to Integration and AI, an expert talk series from IBM webMethods Hybrid Integration. Integration used to be about connecting apps and data. Now, AI is adding a whole new layer on top of it, and nobody has a clean playbook yet. This is what the series is about. Each episode, we bring in one expert to answer one important topic on the real business challenges. If you work in integration or run a platform team or lead your company's integration and AI strategy, this series is for you. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of our Expert Talk series, where we explore the ideas shaping the future of enterprise technology. Today, we are joined by our expert Matthias Biehl, an API strategist and advisor. We will be discussing a topic that is evolving from industry buzzword to a critical business priority in the integration world, governing the AI agents and rethinking AI gateways in the agentic architecture. With AI agents acting independently, the shift from assistive to autonomous AI, where it is starting to make decisions on our behalf, raises a critical questions for many business leaders. So let me start there. Matthias, how should the business leaders think about AI agents?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me here at IBM Expert Talks. Great pleasure to be here. And in my role as API and AI strategist, I talk to lots of businesses about their API strategy and now their AI strategy and how those two kind of merge and need to go forward hand in hand. Yeah, so it's very important, coming back to your question, to really understand what is the goal that people have. So usually these goals about agents and the agentic enterprise, they really come from the top of the organization, from top level management, from the CEO even. So the vision is to have agents in the enterprise. They work side by side with your regular staff. So you have basically a workforce in your organization that consists of both humans, highly skilled and trained, very specialized in their domains, working in every department. And in addition, you have those AI agents, right? And also there's not going to be one or two agents, but basically there will be agents all over the organization in each department. Marketing, R&D, IT, HR, every department will have agents working right next to the to human workers. And the idea is, of course, that some of those tasks that are repetitive, get, so to say, outsourced to the agents. And that could be just freeing up capacity for humans to work on more strategic, more interesting, not so repetitive tasks. And this vision, we see lots and lots of organizations to take up, right? So we do this IBM CEO study. We've done it in 2025. We've done it in 2026, where we go out and we ask, as IBM, the CEOs that we work with, and they basically underline the importance of this agentic enterprise vision. So we see this basically everywhere being picked up and seen as a goal. The challenge is, however, that the organization itself, including the IT systems that are required, are not up to speed. And CEOs know this. They basically, with this vision, they push the organization to move faster than the organization is actually capable and comfortable of moving. And this pressure that's created by these high-level ambitious goals is then felt in the IT department, including the integration departments that we work with. And out of this friction that's being created, there is a couple of challenges, like more hands-on challenges that we can maybe talk about later in this interview. But all in all, it was super exciting times with the agentic enterprise vision.
Perfect. Thank you, Matthias. So What does fundamentally change when we move from AI as just a co-pilot to AI agents in a B2B world?
Yeah, so I think people have evolved their AI understanding. If we think back to maybe the early days when ChatGPT came out in 2023, right, then people were kind of in awe of this chatbot, right? It was all about these chatbots. And business leaders recognized, okay, this is something we want to have in our enterprise as well. And the technology that we used back then was these LLMs, kind of raw LLMs. We did something called prompt engineering, which means we were trying to formalize the prompt, optimize the prompt that was going into these LLMs to create better answers. There's, however, a lot of limitations to that approach, as we've discovered, right, in the early days. There's the limitation of it can only answer based on what it has been trained on. And there's a knowledge cutoff date sometime. It doesn't know any real-time data. It doesn't know anything that happened yesterday because that's not in the trained data. And then it hopefully doesn't know anything about your customers or your customer data that's in your system. So it's kind of limited. Even though it is very impressive in how it formulates and articulates the answers, it doesn't reach into your enterprise and it can't work directly with these enterprise systems. So the second iteration tried to address this. And the second reference architecture was the retrieval augmented generation, in short, RAG. That was the second reference architecture that we had, where we basically said, we have some database here with some company specific data, and we're going to inject relevant pieces of that data into the prompt whenever this prompt before this prompt is being sent to the LLM. And that way we could already add a little bit more company specific data to the answers generated by the LLM. And now, because there is still no possibility to act on the data, right, with this RAG-based approach, we have the third iteration of a reference architecture for agentic enterprise, and this is the AI agents. So AI agents basically have three components. The first one is still the LLM. The LLM provides us the intelligence, right? The ability to kind of answer in an intelligent and an autonomous way. The second component of an AI agent is then the ability to reach into the enterprise systems that are there in each of our customers' install base, right? So they have their CRM system, they have their HR system, they have their SAP system, that everything is already there, and that's where the differentiating data lives of the enterprise. So you need to connect this up. This is the second component of an AI agent. The third component is then looking into the future, especially where you say an AI agent needs to collaborate with other AI agents. Why is that? Because AI agents are specialists, right? They have a very niche knowledge, and they need to work together in a team, just like human specialists work in teams to achieve complex tasks and outcomes. These AI agents also need to work in teams. They need to collaborate. They need to reach out. They need to find other AI agents that can complement their skills and thus solve a bigger task. And I think that's where we stand right now. So we've now seen how these reference architectures have evolved, right? From just LLMs to RAG to now AI agents. And those AI agents are what allows us to bring in company data, act on our data, and that's where the differentiation will happen in the future.
Interesting. So you mentioned one point with respect to the enterprise systems, be it CRM, ERP, SAP solutions, and so on. So with such kind of different business processes in place, what do you actually think that AI agents today, which processes are they ready for?
Yes, very good question. So it all depends on what's already there in your enterprise, right? Ideally, all your processes are automated and you could reach into those processes. But that's not always the case. So what we see right now when we look at how people are actually spending their AI budget, what do AI projects actually produce? It is mostly those AI prototypes which are being focused on, right? So it's internal use cases, it's prototypes that people are testing out, those LLM capabilities and how well they can reach out into the enterprise, and also from a security perspective. But this has limitations, right? People don't trust the AI agents to move into production, to have customer-facing use cases, to really be in mainstream. And what's holding people back is then, of course, very interesting. There have been a couple of studies by all big, by all big organizations that look into the space. So McKinsey, Gartner, Forrester, they've all looked into the space and said, like, why do people not move those cool AI agent technologies into production much more right now? Even MIT has looked into this. And they have found basically that the challenge is integration, getting to the data in the enterprise. And the second thing is trust. Right? So those two things need to be addressed. How can this AI agent, in a secure manner, reach into the enterprise, get the data it needs, and work with this data using LLMs? And then how do we trust this whole process? And I think the trust thing is what we really need to work on. Because when I then say, we need to build a trust for those AI agents, people will sometimes come back and say, we'll just wait for the next version of the LLM that's going to come out, and that will solve the problem. But trust cannot be solved on that level, on that technological level, where it's just one component. You need to really look across the complete architecture and build trust into it from the start. There's a couple of approaches that we can talk about, right, in this conversation on how to actually build the trust, and how to actually prepare your organization for the integration challenge that's also there, so that you can move your AI agents comfortably into production.
Interesting. So you did mention about getting a secure data or from the trust perspective. So let's drill down a bit on that. So when you say with respect to the enterprise systems, if AI agents need a secure access to the data, then how exactly can the enterprise prepare themselves to pass those data to agentic AIs?
Yeah, so that's one of the main challenges, right? And let me just talk a little bit more about the challenge there. It's, of course, securing those pieces of data and the functionality of the enterprise, but it's also about, the complexity of the IT landscape, because this data doesn't just sit in one system. It sits in many different systems, and those systems are deployed on so many different in so many different places. Some of them are in your own data center, some of them are somewhere in the cloud, and they're SaaS-based applications. So you need to reach into all of these different applications, and you need to basically govern the access to all of them. So having a access layer, so to say, is a good basis, and many organizations have already an integration solution that can help them reach in a unified manner into all these different systems. Now, what you need on top of that is some form of governance. And governance can mean, of course, a lot of different things. And let's just take this apart. I usually like to think about governance according to the three components of an AI agent, right? So there's the AI agent has intelligence. So we need to govern somehow the access to intelligence, which is basically the access to an LLM. we need to govern the access to the enterprise systems, and we need to govern the access to other AI agents for the collaboration. So on each of these three different components, we need to put governance mechanisms in place. So a governance mechanism, what is that? That just says, okay, you want to access this data. Are you allowed to access it? Are you allowed to access it in the frequency that you requested? Gateway products are kind of the mechanism that allows you to resolve these governance constraints, that enforce these governance constraints, where you can define policies, rules, and so forth that kind of have a rules-based, basically a rules-based landscape or a set of constraints that help you create the trust in those systems.
Interesting. So now with multiple different enterprises have different applications. There are tool sprawl that we keep hearing about. So when you talk about this particular governance and the security, how exactly can a business enterprise be able to tackle that part?
Yeah, you mentioned sprawl, right?
Yes.
So sprawl can happen on so many different levels. We usually talk about API sprawl. So companies have invested in integration flows, built APIs for those integration flows. They have built APIs that expose data from those different backend systems. And in the beginning, we had a manageable set of data, but what happened in lots of enterprises is that they've discovered the value of having those endpoints, those APIs managed. And now there was an explosion of APIs, which led, together with some pressures from business to deliver things, to an uncontrolled growth of these APIs. So the problem is not that they are growing. The problem is that it's an uncontrolled growth. And a lot of those governance mechanisms that we put in place are kind of, people try to find shortcuts around them. And so they're not applied consistently, which kind of defeat the purpose of it. What people now need to do with API sprawl happening or having happened in the past is they kind of need to catch up to all these APIs and bring them back under governance, which is, of course, a tedious task. So what can we do to actually control API sprawl right from the get-go is we need to have somehow a really lightweight way of getting all these APIs under management, getting them all governed. There's mechanisms out there, best practices that you can apply. For example, using an open API specification helps with checking things even in an automated way and making it very smooth and very easy for people to check compliance of your APIs. But then also, it's not only about the APIs, right? You can then say it's not only API sprawl, actually. Now people in big organizations have the problem of API gateway sprawl, which is an additional complexity which comes on top, where some APIs might be developed in one part of the organization, which has another API gateway, and then some other API gateways in other parts of the organization. And the idea of API management is to have an overview of all your APIs. Why? Because you want to have consistency and you want to know what have I already built, which APIs are there, so I don't duplicate them. So from that perspective, having a lot of different API gateways adds to the complexity of your landscape, and you want to manage all of these. There are mechanisms here again for getting that handled, and this is the idea of federation. Federation basically acknowledges that once an API gateway is there, It might be a different API gateway than your strategic solution, but something happens here, something happens there. They acknowledge that you can't rip that gateway out and replace it by something strategic. So instead of doing that, they say, leave that gateway in place. It's doing its job. What we want to get is a consistent view. And this consistent view is then achieved by a control plane and a federated approach for API management, where you have, well, this central control plane, and you have distributed execution on all the different gateways. So you don't have to migrate and move away from whatever you have. You just get all the data in one place. So you can, on that one place, then see what's happening, what's going wrong, what's going right, and you can apply even policies consistently.
So in the beginning, you mentioned about many enterprises having speed for innovation, focusing on the speed of innovation. And with this complexity, do you think it slows down the innovation, or is it at a high risk? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we need to have both things, right? So that's, of course, the challenge of innovation, that, yeah, we want to have things yesterday. We want to be at the forefront of innovation, and we want to bring out new things quickly. And we see this with our customers, right? They want to have those AI agents ready in operation. On the other hand, they have these, issues with trusting those AI agents. And I think bringing those two worlds together, of course, helps. And what you need to do is you need to have a way of ensuring governance in a simplified way, right? So governance comes easy. And what helps here is, of course, applying AI technologies also on your governance layer, right? So you have now the possibility to define your APIs, and develop your APIs and test your APIs on a gateway or in your management solution with the support of AI technology, right? Because all these, it's basically a cycle where you say all these new AI agents need more APIs. And then the question is, who develops these APIs and governs these APIs? It can't be just the same people who have done it in the past, because now the requirements are so much more and so many more APIs need to be developed. So we need to support these people, right? And at IBM, we see it as our task to support the API engineers, the integration developers, to give them new tools to manage all of this new demand that's coming their way. So we have different forms of agents which have the specialization of supporting those API engineers and integration developers. So I think making integration more manageable is a part in getting it actually applied in scale in the enterprise.
So how do you think about governing AI agents? Is it different from our traditional governing traditional applications or the APIs?
Yes, it is different. And in a way, we use similar mechanisms, but let's look at this. So you can apply governance mechanism, of course, on the complete AI agent. You can say, okay, this AI agent, what is it allowed to do, what not, what are constraints to its output? But then you can also look at the components that the AI agent is built of. And for each of the component, you can apply governance mechanisms. And that's what we've looked at, right? What I've talked about in so far, where you can say, hey, let's look at the LLM, right? How do we actually govern the LLM? There is kind of governing the access to the LLM, and this gives us some insights into the cost, especially because calling these LLMs is very, very expensive, especially if you do this at scale. So you can then look into which agent is actually calling the LLM the most, and do we actually get a return on this investment that we have in the tokens that we buy for this agent. So getting some visibility is already key, and then also protecting it. because some of these AI agents, they really go rogue. Yeah? They might be in an endless loop, and they hammer the LLM over and over again without producing any output for the customer. We want to stop that, of course. And a LLM gateway helps you protect from such cases. And then we have, of course, also the gateways which sit in front of your enterprise landscape. So this is the second pillar of the AI agent. We call this then an MCP gateway because what agents use to connect to the enterprise is the Model Context Protocol, MCP, which then needs to translate basically to the existing styles, integration styles, and protocols that you use in the enterprise, be it GraphQL, be it REST, be it some API, SOAP-based, MFT, B2B, whatever, right? So that's going to be taken care of there as well. And then you want to govern, of course, also how those other agents are allowed to communicate with that particular agent. And you can put some constraints in place there as well. So I would say what's most like the traditional governance is the gateway, right? The gateway reuses a lot of the policy mechanisms that some people that are using API gateways already are familiar with. And you just apply it on those three different components. And that is in itself, I think, a very good or very interesting insight, because API management and API governance is now taking the best practices on what was developed in the last 10, 20 years in that space and applies it to all the different components of AI agents. So whoever has worked as an API engineer, API management, and so forth, can now take this skill and really apply it in AI agents. And I think that's putting APIs and integration at a very crucial and very, very important space in this whole AI transformation.
So we spoke a lot about governance. So let me just flip the question a bit here. What do you think are the risks that the enterprise face in the absence of governance?
Well, in the absence of proper governance, there is probably security risks as one of the biggest parts. Security risks means someone can access your enterprise systems, can get data out. So we might have new protocols for AI agents to access those enterprise systems, namely MCP, the Model Context Protocol. But still, these are interfaces, and those interfaces need to be protected. Not everyone should have access to all the data that's in those enterprise systems. And proper security mechanisms need to be put in place. Some might argue it's even more important now than it has been in the past, because someone could also write a hacker AI agent that uses those MCP endpoints and just brute force their way into the organization. So I think having those security mechanisms in place, best practices are known from the API space, is really a basic that everyone should have when they move into AI agents.
So when you say about the basic security measure, now there are many CIOs or CTOs today. So what do you think should be the top priority? Should it be about building agents or integrating data or establishing governance?
Yeah, it's really hard to focus on one. Of course, you want to have AI agents, right? That's the whole point of doing that. So being able to build AI agents properly is of course a big part. But I actually like to think about this from another perspective, right? So you as a CEO or CTO, you should enable the business to do whatever it needs to do, and whatever it needs to achieve its outcomes and make customers happy. So if you look at what is that and what are the demands, then you start with those use cases, right? You start with use cases that really change how the business is doing its business, and how customers get served. And all the requirements basically come out of that. And then, of course, we need to think about how do we protect things and how do we make things possible. So making things possible has two aspects. There is making agent building efficient, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel whenever you build a new AI agent. So that means using an AI agent framework. Probably there's lots of AI agent frameworks. IBM has some AI agent frameworks. And then you need to think about your integration landscape. We have seen that reaching into the enterprise, getting the data that the agent needs is crucial. So think about your integration landscape. What are the challenges there? Are you facing some API sprawl, API gateway sprawl? So that is probably one of the things that need to be fixed as well. And then third of all, how do you introduce governance? So this needs to be there. We've discussed about the risks of security. We've discussed also about the rogue agents that might, be in an endless loop and just hammer your resources or create token demand without any business outcome by just looping over and over. So all of this needs to be in place. All right, so it's not an either or. It's your agent building frameworks, it's your integration, and it's your governance. And if you want to start from a business perspective. How can you, in your first AI agents, your prototypes that you have maybe already built, how can you support those to move them into production using these three different components?
Great. Thank you, Matthias. Thanks for sharing your knowledge. And this concludes our first episode of the Expert Talk series. Thanks a lot. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone for listening. I have a QR code here on the screen. Whenever you want to reach out and deep dive and discuss any of these topics we've talked about today, feel free to reach out.
Matthias made one thing clear today. An AI agent without access to your enterprise system is just a chatbot. Getting from prototype to an agentic enterprise takes trust, and trust starts with secure and governed integration layer underneath. So, this is the question for you today. Is your integration architecture actually ready for the AI strategy you are building? If the answer is no, that is where the real work is. Let us know in your comments what are the topics that you want us to cover during our next episodes. See you in the next episode.